It was one hot afternoon after school that the breaking point finally arrived, the first of many that would mark her life forever. Clara came home from school exhausted. The heat of the day and the fatigue of classes had left her worn out. She dropped her backpack on the floor and went straight to the shower. When she was already wet, she realized she had forgotten to grab a towel. She yelled at Eduardo to bring her a towel, just as she had done since she was a child. And then, in that moment, something changed irreversibly. He walked into the bathroom with the towel in his hands, but instead of just handing it over and leaving, he stood there, looking at Clara. "Here's the towel, Clary," he said with a smile that, to Clara, seemed different from before. She expected him to leave, but he didn't. He stood there, his eyes fixed on her. Clara felt discomfort growing in her chest. Why wouldn't he just leave? "Thank you, you can leave it there," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice came out shaky. Eduardo, however, didn't seem willing to leave. He remained there for a moment that seemed to last much longer than it should have. Clara noticed that his eyes were following her in a strange way, something she had never noticed before. The silence of the bathroom, previously full of steam and carefreeness, now seemed suffocating. A new feeling took hold of Clara, discomfort, fear, something she could not define, but that somehow touched her deeply. At that moment, something inside Clara changed, a premonition, a shadow of doubt. Eduardo, that man she had always called her father, the one who had filled the void in her life, now seemed like a strange figure. She felt a lump in her throat, a feeling that perhaps what had happened was not right, but she did not know how to react. She was confused, torn between what she had always known as normal and this new uncomfortable perception that was haunting her. After that day, things were never the same again. The silence in the house, previously calm and familiar, was now heavy, full of something that Clara could not explain. She didn't tell anyone about what she felt, but the discomfort grew with each passing day, each time Eduardo got closer than he should have. Clara began to avoid certain moments alone with him, but without making it obvious. After all, how could she explain to herself that she suddenly felt uncomfortable with someone she had always treated like a father? However, as time passed, Clara began to notice more changes in Eduardo. They weren't drastic or easy to identify. It was something in his gaze, in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There was an intensity in his eyes that wasn't there before, a kind of curiosity that Clara found uncomfortable. One time, when she was alone in the living room watching television, she felt Eduardo's gaze on her for too long. When she looked at him, the usual smile was there, but Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had never felt this way around him before. A mixture of distrust and fear began to form inside her, but Clara didn't know how to process that feeling. After all, he had always treated her so well. Was she exaggerating? Was there evil in her? She thought. "Daughter, can I help you shower today?" asked her stepfather as Clara, standing in the shower, stared at him with wide eyes, paralyzed with terror. She could never have imagined that this simple request would change her life forever. Clara, still very young, had few memories of her biological father. He had abandoned her mother, Lucia, when she was just a baby, and his absence always loomed like a silent shadow over her life. Clara never understood why he left or why he never tried to return, but Lucia, a resilient and determined woman, did everything in her power to raise Clara alone in her early years, filling the void left by her father with all the love she could offer. Things began to change when Lucia met Eduardo. Clara was only 2 years old, and for her, Eduardo's presence seemed natural. He appeared in their lives as a breath of stability, a man much older than Lucia, but who brought with him an aura of security and serenity that soon won them both over. Clara, so young, didn't remember much about what her life was like before him. For her, Eduardo had always been there and had always been part of the family. He treated her with tenderness, played with her in the yard, taught her simple things like riding a bike, and often read her bedtime stories. His playful and caring manner made Clara grow up feeling that he was her real father. In fact, he was the only father Clara had ever known, and that's how she began calling him Dad from an early age. "You love him, don't you, daughter?" Lucia would often comment, noting the close relationship the two had built. Clara always responded with a smile, feeling safe by his side. She truly believed that Eduardo had filled the void left by her biological father. He was her hero, the father figure who protected her and made her feel loved. There was no reason to suspect anything. The relationship between the three seemed perfect. Lucia, Eduardo and Clara were a family that everyone in the neighborhood envied, always seen together on weekends, having lunch out or walking in the park. Eduardo was always affectionate and the kind of man everyone described as a good catch. Lucia had found a partner who treated her well, and Clara, despite the absence of a biological father, seemed truly happy. For many years, this dynamic remained unchanged. Eduardo was Clara and Lucia's safe haven, someone they trusted completely. He helped with their homework, made jokes to make them laugh, and whenever Lucia was tired, he took on the day-to-day responsibilities, such as picking Clara up from school or making dinner. Everything seemed so normal that Clara never had any reason to question his presence in her life. However, it was when Clara turned 10 that something began to change subtly. The family dynamic that had always been calm began to transform. After years of being a housewife, Lucia got a night job, which meant that Eduardo and Clara would spend a lot more time alone. At first, this didn't seem like a problem. Eduardo continued to be the same affectionate, playful and protective person he had always been. Clara trusted him completely and considered him her real father. He helped her with her schoolwork, and they still laughed together during the small activities of everyday life. Until that moment, Clara had no idea that her days were about to change drastically. After a few days of this uncomfortable feeling, Clara decided to share it with her mother. One Saturday afternoon, while Lucia was preparing lunch, Clara approached her, unsure of how to approach the subject. "Mom, can I tell you something?" Clara began, with a lump in her throat. "Of course, dear," Lucia replied, without taking her eyes off the pan. I think Eduardo is looking at me strangely, in a weird way. I don't know, but I feel uncomfortable sometimes." Her mother's words, instead of reassuring her, left her more confused. "Oh, Clara, you must be imagining things. You grew up with him. He always took care of you like a father. He's looking at you normally. What's wrong with that?" Clara remained silent. Her mother's words, instead of calming her, made her feel even more lost. Lucia trusted Eduardo completely, and when she saw that her mother wasn't worried, Clara felt guilty for having raised the issue. "It must be all in my head," she murmured, forcing a smile to end the subject. But inside, something had already changed. The discomfort didn't go away. In fact, it grew every time Eduardo watched her or got too close. Clara felt that uncomfortable feeling return. Now, however, she didn't know if she could trust her own feelings anymore. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. One day, Lucia came home later than usual, and Eduardo seemed more agitated than usual. He approached Clara and, with a smile that the girl had previously found warm, suggested that they play video games together. She accepted, trying to feel normal, trying to tell herself that there was nothing wrong with it, but something in her mind began to set off warning signs. Eduardo, who had always been so predictable, was now watching her in a way that Clara couldn't explain. His smile seemed the same, but his eyes wouldn't stop looking at her body. The days turned into weeks, and the discomfort that Clara felt in Eduardo's presence continued to grow. It wasn't something she could point out directly, as if he was doing something explicitly wrong, but the feeling that something was different haunted her like a constant shadow. Every time they were alone, Clara felt Eduardo's gaze linger longer than it should, and his smile, once reassuring, now seemed loaded with an intention she couldn't understand. She just knew that, somehow, she no longer felt as comfortable with him as she used to. At school, Clara tried to carry on with her life as normal. She still saw Sophia, her best friend, every day, but the joy of spending time together seemed to have faded. Whenever Sophia asked if everything was okay, Clara would answer with a forced smile, avoiding going into details. Even if she wanted to tell someone, the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. At home, things continued to gradually get worse. Eduardo's presence began to become more and more invasive. Eduardo hadn't done anything else that she could point out as wrong, but he seemed more present when Clara was alone in a room in the house. Soon he would appear. When she tried to watch television, he would sit next to her in a way that had not bothered her before, but now made her tense. Clara began to pay more attention to his gestures, to his words. He was saying the same thing he always said, but there was something new in his tone, something Clara couldn't define. One afternoon, while Clara was doing her homework at the kitchen table, Eduardo came home from work. He put his keys on the table and, in his usual manner, asked if she needed help with her homework. Clara hesitated for a second, something she had never done before when accepting his help. Eduardo had always patiently guided her through subjects she was struggling with. But this time, the thought of sitting next to him sent a chill down her spine. "No, thank you," Clara said, her eyes never leaving her notebook. She felt Eduardo's gaze on her, something that would have gone unnoticed before but now felt like an invisible weight. He walked away silently, but that brief interaction left Clara uneasy for the rest of the day. Over time, she began to avoid Eduardo more openly, but she didn't realize the impact it could have. When he asked if she wanted to see a movie together, Clara would say she was tired or had a lot of homework. When he suggested they go for a walk, she would make up an excuse. It was as if her life was unfolding in a new chapter, a chapter full of tension and fear. One night, Lucia was getting ready to go out. Her mother was dressing with special care, something she hadn't done in a long time. Clara felt a pang of anxiety in her chest, but she tried to hide it, pretending that everything was fine. She didn't want her mother to notice the panic that was growing inside her. "Are you going out, Mom?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucia smiled, not noticing her daughter's anxious tone. "Yes, I am, dear. A quick dinner with a friend." The word friend sounded like a deafening echo in Clara's mind, and she felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. Memories of the recent past, the nights of terror and Eduardo's invasive looks came flooding back. What if this new man was like Eduardo? What would she do? How would she protect her mother and herself from all of that happening again? Clara tried to control her breathing, but panic began to grow, taking over her body. She felt her heart racing, her chest tightening and a shortness of breath that made her sit up in bed, desperately trying to catch her breath. Lucia, distracted while getting ready, did not notice her daughter's condition, and Clara, who wanted to scream, found herself unable to say a word. When she saw her mother pick up her bag and say goodbye with a light kiss on her forehead, Clara felt her despair grow even more. The prospect of her mother leaving to meet a man terrified her so much that she could barely move. She wanted to ask Lucia to stay, she wanted to beg her not to bring anyone else into their lives, but the words would not come out. How could she explain? How could she tell the truth? The silence of her pain kept her prisoner, and the fear that no one would believe her suffocated her. As she heard the sound of the door closing, Clara realized that she was panting. Her vision became blurred, and the world around her seemed to spin. She curled up in bed, hugging her knees tightly, trying to hold on to the sense of security that the room should bring. The idea of another man entering their lives was unbearable. She couldn't bear to go through all that again. She couldn't face another male figure invading the space that should be safe for her. Night fell, and Clara remained in the room, enveloped in an anguish that she didn't know how to express. Each second seemed to drag on, and fear made time pass excruciatingly. She couldn't sleep while she waited for her mother, thoughts and fears swirling endlessly through her mind. Every noise outside, every sound of a car passing by, made her hold her breath, hoping that Lucia would come home and that their encounter would be nothing more than a forgotten memory. When Lucia finally returned, smiling, Clara tried to pretend to be asleep, but her body was still on alert, her muscles tense and her breathing irregular. Lucia, unaware of the turmoil her daughter was facing, closed the bedroom door, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. Luna watched her mother, Clara, getting ready to leave. Anxiety tightened her chest, but she tried to hide it, pretending that everything was in order. She didn't want Clara to notice the fear that was growing inside her. "Are you going out, Mom?" Luna asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Clara smiled, not catching the tension in her daughter's question. "Yes, I am, dear. Just a quick dinner with a friend." The word friend reverberated in Luna's mind, and she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Memories of nights of terror and the disturbing looks of Vita, her stepfather, flooded her mind like an avalanche. What if this new man was just like Vita? How would she protect her mother and herself? Luna tried to control her breathing, but panic spread, taking over her body. Her racing heart, tight chest and shortness of breath made her sit up in bed, desperately trying to catch her breath. Clara, oblivious to her daughter's torment, didn't notice Luna's state as she said goodbye with a soft kiss on her forehead. Luna's despair increased when she heard the door close. She was panting, her vision blurred, and the world seemed to spin around her. She curled up on the bed, hugging her knees, trying to find some comfort in the safety that the room should offer. The idea of another man entering their lives was unbearable. Luna couldn't bear to go through all that again. She couldn't face another male figure who would turn her home into a space of fear. The night wore on and Luna remained in her room, enveloped in an anguish that she didn't know how to express. Each second seemed like an eternity and fear made time drag on. She couldn't sleep, thoughts and fears spinning endlessly in her mind. When Clara finally returned, with a smile on her lips, Luna tried to pretend she was asleep, but her alert body betrayed her false tranquility. Clara, unaware of the turmoil her daughter was facing, closed the bedroom door, leaving Luna alone with her thoughts. Luna's pain was a secret she couldn't share, a weight she carried in silence. In the days that followed, whenever Clara mentioned her new friend, panic would take over Luna again. She was afraid that the man would get too close, that he would invade their space and turn their lives into a nightmare again. Luna knew she needed to find a way to overcome her fear, but how could she do it without revealing the truth, without exposing what Vita had done? The silence kept her chained, and the presence of a new man seemed like just a harbinger that the cycle of suffering could repeat itself. Months turned into years and Luna, now older, tried her best to adapt to the new routine with her mother. Vita's distance was a relief, but his memories continued to haunt her. Every time she closed her eyes, she relived the moments of terror, the invasive gaze, the touch that had made her feel so defenseless. In silence, she carried the invisible scars he had left. The guilt and fear were still there, even if they now took different forms. It was on a seemingly calm Sunday that everything came to light. They were in the living room, watching television side by side, when a news program began reporting on abuse and domestic violence. Clara was distracted, but Luna stared at the screen. The stories told were painfully familiar. Her heart tightened and her breathing became heavier. Each story, each testimony, directly affected what she had kept hidden for so long. The secret she had been carrying in silence began to throb inside her like a wound that had never healed. Clara noticed Luna's breathing tremble and, when she looked to the side, she saw her daughter's eyes filled with tears. Pain and fear were evident on Luna's face. Clara felt her own heart race. Something was very wrong. "Daughter," Clara said, placing her hand gently on Luna's shoulder. "What is it, my love? Why are you like this?" Luna couldn't answer. The lump in her throat was suffocating her. For years, she had hidden the truth, trying to bury the pain, convincing herself that maybe it was better this way, that no one would understand. But in that moment, as if a dam had broken, everything came to the surface. The pain, the fear, the shame. What she had kept so hard to keep back now burst out, and she could no longer hold back her tears. Initially silent, they soon turned into uncontrollable sobs. She brought her hands to her face, trying to hide the pain that was finally breaking free, but the intensity of her emotions overwhelmed her. "I'm sorry," Luna repeated through her tears, barely able to breathe. I couldn't tell you before." The words hit Clara like a devastating blow. She felt a pang of anguish and a feeling that something very serious was about to happen. Her heart was pounding and a multitude of thoughts and worries ran through her mind. "Tell me what, Luna?" Clara's voice was shaky, more than ever wishing that her daughter could trust her. Luna took a deep breath, trying to control the despair that was taking hold of her. For a few seconds, everything was silent, and then she whispered, almost without the strength to continue, "Vita." Her voice failed and she looked away, unable to look at her mother. He did things, Mother. Things that I couldn't understand." The words came out in fragments, interrupted by sobs. The silence that followed was frightening, but Luna knew she couldn't stop now. It was time to tell the truth, to let out everything that was suffocating her. And even with her heart in pieces, she continued, "I was so scared, Mom. I didn't know what to do." The pain in Luna's voice was almost palpable, and Clara began to understand the magnitude of what she was hearing. Clara's expression changed instantly. Her face went pale, her eyes wide as she tried to absorb what her daughter was saying. Luna's words seemed to echo in her mind, and suddenly, everything began to make sense. The changes in behavior, the isolation, the inexplicable fear. It was as if a shock went through Clara's body, and the pain she felt was indescribable. "Luna," Clara's voice came out as a whisper, almost an apology. She approached her daughter, pulling her into a hug as if trying to protect the girl from all the horrors she had faced in silence. "I'm so sorry, I'm sorry I didn't see you." Luna sank into her mother's arms and they cried together, as if tears were the only way to ease the accumulated pain. Clara held her daughter tightly, feeling her heart break into 1,000 pieces. The weight of guilt was overwhelming and she couldn't stop apologizing. "I should have seen you, I should have done something," Clara repeated, her voice choked, tears streaming down her face. "Forgive me, daughter. I'm so sorry." After a few minutes, Clara wiped away her tears and looked at Luna with a new determination on her face, still marked by suffering. "We're going to get help, Luna. You don't have to carry this alone anymore," Clara said with a firm but emotional voice. "We'll get through this together. I promise everything will be okay. I won't leave you alone anymore." Luna felt exhausted, but relieved to have finally revealed the truth. She knew there was still a long way to go and that the healing process would be painful, but now she felt like she could face whatever came her way. The guilt and fear were still there, but for the first time, Luna felt like she wouldn't have to face them alone. The two hugged again, and at that moment, despite all the pain and tears, a a flame of hope began to ignite. Luna was no longer chained to her silence and, with the support of her mother, she was ready to start over, one step at a time. And you, have you ever been through a similar situation, or do you know someone who has? Leave your answer in the comments. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Comment below what you thought of this story and which city you're watching from. Like and subscribe to our channel so that, together, we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories. See you later.